everyone. I'm Caroline Miller, your host for Just Read It, a continuing series of book reviews by authors of the Pacific Northwest who give us their take on New York Times bestsellers. Today, I have two guests who are going to join me in discussing the New York Times bestseller, Things in Jars. Sarina Dorie, who writes sort of gothic things, I'll let her tell you, and Richard Lovett, an award-winning science fiction writer, who will join us in this. So I'm going to start with you. Sarina, tell us a little bit about your work. I know you have a book. I think it's a book just out, isn't it? Or am I wrong in that?
Yes, I do have a book just out. It is in the Vega Bloodmeyer Wicked Witch series, and this is the first book in the series, but it's really the fifth book that just came out. And this is a spin-off series of one of my other series, the Wombi School for Wayward Witches, and both series are fantasy series, but they're also mysteries. And it's really wicked witches that are solving the mysteries. And the tagline for this book is "Wicked witches have more fun, especially when solving a mystery." And the tagline for the other series is "You think you know the world of magical boarding schools, but not from a teacher's perspective for at-risk youth."
Oh, that sounds wonderful. And how many books are in this upcoming series, did you say, Sarina? How many?
I don't know. I think if I could end on 13, that would be a magical number, but I never can predict.
Okay. All right. Richard, your science fiction book was out sort of toward the end of last year. Tell us a little bit about your book.
So my book is Neptune's Treasure. It's based on an award-winning series of science fiction novellas that I wrote for Analog Science Fiction and Fact over the course of several years, and that I was able to put together into a novel-length book. Its main characters are Floyd and Brittany. In fact, the series is known as the Floyd and Brittany series. Floyd is a space tug pilot and a loner, and Brittany is his computer program who comes to life and basically lives in his head. And he has to come to grips with the fact that he is another being with feelings and needs and emotions who he has to deal with when he'd rather be alone. And so it's about dealing with people and what it's like to be with people. And it's basically a weird love story, but not really a love story. It's about what love is about.
Okay. Well, now, audience, there are a couple of pretty imaginative plot lines right there for you to consider. But today we are discussing Things in Jars by the New York Times bestseller writer Jess Kidd. And just background, it's a Victorian setting where a pipe-smoking Bridie Devine, and I think is her name, female detective, is hired to find a lost child, Christabel Berwick, who has some very strange powers. And her father hires Bridie to find the girl. She's about 6 years old. Okay, I've done my heavy lifting. Let's start with you, Sarina. Tell us a little bit more about the book and your take on it, since it's sort of up your alley, Victorian Gothic.
Yeah, I love fantasy in general, and I do have a steampunk series. So I've done a lot of Victorian research. I love Victorian things. I like to make Victorian things. I love that era. And this is a book that has ghosts, mermaids, independent woman, some uppity characters, conspiracies, secrets, progressive sexuality and gender issues. There's all sorts of things that are interesting about this book. And the mystery of this book really hooked me. But also, like, as soon as we get a ghost, I was hooked. And then as soon as there's like a little bit of oh, what is this like little mystery with a mermaid? Like I was also hooked. So the fantasy elements, the mystery elements were really strong. I love the characters. But I will say, when I first started reading this book, I was really thrown off by the beginning, and I probably wouldn't have kept reading it, except we were doing this video blog, and I knew I had to read it. But like, there were so many things I didn't like about the beginning that I would say to people, if you think you don't like the book, like, give it a chance, like wait another chapter or two, because some of the things that, like, I don't know if it's the prologue or the first chapter, but it was very ungrounded. I don't like mysteries or books where there's no names used and I don't know what's happening. I don't like second person breaking the fourth wall unless there's like a really good reason or it's done really well. Like things like this story is starting off told through a raven's perspective, and like all those things are just like things that I really don't like. Present tense, like all of these things, like
okay. Well, let's get our other guest in here, Richard, and I don't know if you want to pick up on Sarina's impression, or take up another slot, but let's start. Were you troubled by the way the book began?
I totally agree that the trouble, I had the same reaction she did, of like, oh my gosh, what did I bite off? I'm committed to read this thing, and 350 pages of this is going to take me a real slog. And it did change. And it's like, yes, I didn't, and she goes back to that at every major scene transition, but at least they're shorter and you know they're going to change back. And Raven's eye view, I think it's always a bird. And an omniscient bird that's peering into everybody's nightmare dreams and this, that, or the other. And it's like, I thought it was like, maybe I'd acquire this taste, but luckily she shifted. Other than that, I wasn't quite as thrilled with it. I found it was intriguing. Once it got going, it kept me, but it was, and so it's sometimes compelling and very frustrating. And the major frustration is that I write science fiction. I've written mystery, and there are rules of writing mystery and science fiction or genre, and she pretty much violated them. And it's okay to violate the rules, but it didn't give me anything back for violating the rules, except for some sometimes interesting prose and very interesting characters. The best example I would give is that a fundamental rule of genre is that if you take the genre out of it, the story should collapse. That is, if it's science fiction and you take the science fiction elements out of it, it's not science fiction. I couldn't sell it if I did that. It's mainstream Dusty-Duck, and there's nothing wrong with the mainstream, but you could have taken the ghosts, you could have taken all the supernatural stuff out of this, and Christabel would still be a strange character, and it wouldn't change much of anything. And I kept waiting for her to pull the threads together and use the supernatural. The ghost, Rudy, who is a great character, is a perfect example of this.
Okay, let's stop there. I'd like you to pick up on Rudy, Sarina, and because you're fascinated with this ghost. Tell us a little bit about him and what your impression was.
Yes, he was a great character. I loved that character. I liked the characters in this book in general. So I think that was one of the author's strengths. I liked the mystery aspects and how subplots were woven together and things that you thought were insignificant came back. I think that the author was a master of weaving the mystery elements together. For me, like, I think, I don't think, like, I understand what Richard is saying, that if you take one element out, like if you take the science fiction out, or the science out of like a novel, it's not really science fiction. For me, like, I thought all the fantasy elements were integral to the plot. And all the mystery elements were integral. It's hard for me to talk about Rudy without talking about the end. And I do feel it's so important not to like be a spoiler. So like I can just say, like, I really liked it, but there were some things that the author made in her choices that I didn't like.
Well, let's give our readers a better handle on the plot. This is a 6-year-old, and she's not actually a mermaid. She's a
Marrow.
That's it, which is the dark side of being a mermaid. And she's got sharp teeth, and she can make people drowned on dry land, and birds and fishes respond to her. And she's been kept away because of these magical powers by her father, who really keeps her more like a
I think you're giving away some of the plot.
I think that's too much too.
I mean, that was part of the story, like figuring out, is this supernatural or not supernatural?
Right. And that was where I was.
Okay, all right. I sort of thought it was right there in the front, but go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, well, the fact she could summon snails was kind of, it did indicate she was something unusual. But yeah, my issue with it was that you had no idea what she was. And in fact, I never heard of what she was. I don't even know whether it's what was invented for the book, which is fine. My concern with her was simply that she could have been a mutant. The whole thing about things in jars and collectors and this whole Victorian thing of the circus and the sideshow and all that was a really nice, that's a real piece of history.
Yeah.
So you could have told the same kidnapping story about somebody with, with some kind of, mutation that made her a sideshow curiosity. And that was my concern. My concern about Rudy is simply that he has all these powers. She should use him in her investigation.
Yes, I agree.
He is the sleuth to die for, and he never sleuths. And she never tests whether he's real by asking him to walk through a wall, tell her what's behind it, and come back, and then she can test it. She thinks he's not real, but she's bright, and she's got this really easy way to check it out, and she never does. And I was like, I have a lot of hair to tear, but I was tearing my hair over this for 150 pages before I finally decided she was never going to do it.
Well, they have a relationship. He's a former boxer, tattooed. His ghost is fully tattooed. And Bridie doesn't really learn till the end of the book what that past relationship is. It's a very tender relationship between a ghost and a human being. But what was either one of you want to chime in here? The drama for me of the book was that we're in Victorian England, and we're then plunged into this world, which is totally bizarre and seems to be brutal. But on the other hand, Bridie earned her living at one point dragging bodies from the Thames. And can you pick it up for then any contrast between this fantasy world that had its own kind of violence and what was going on in the real world? Did that contrast interest either of you? Or
I love that era. So reading about it and seeing some of the factual things in there, I forgot what they called the body snatchers historically. Like
that'll do, body snatchers.
But yeah, like the doctors, the horrible, like, let's do a public surgery and not give someone anesthesia, like all these things, like, and horrible things that people got away with, whether it was for science or because this was the manager of a circus and this is how people were treated and caged like animals. Like all of these things like brought up really good social commentary of the era. And on one hand, I really liked a lot of that, but one of the things that I really do not like as a reader, and probably an author, and probably a feminist as well, is when authors use sexual violence against women as a plot point. And this author did that several times in this book with different characters. And so on one hand, she handled it tastefully. She handled it historically accurately, because this is like one of the dark things about that era, as well as all of these other things. But at the same time, when it becomes a plot point and a trope and it gets used repeatedly, I don't really care for that.
Okay, very good. Well, I'm fascinated to know why both of you were troubled by the beginning. Richard, maybe you toss in a comment about that, because it's pretty grim.
The beginning part, largely because it was hard to read. I mean, it was just a real slog to read. And I wasn't figuring out what was going on. I wasn't even sure until 100 pages later where it fit in the time sequence of anything. Are we looking at something a generation ago as a prologue? Are we looking at the first chapter of Bridie's story? Are we where does it fit? And that bothered me. But mostly it was just the style. I thought I don't like this style. Now, when she got to the rest of it, I wanted to support that. I really liked the depiction of Victorian London. I think that was my frustration with the genre part of it, was the genre part of it didn't add anything to that. I would have been very happy with a straight historical story. And I thought she did really well with the medical stuff. I'd read the Lister biography of the surgeries of that time, and she nailed it as well as that book.
She nailed it.
Yeah.
So you may not have liked the way she decided to open the book, but it wasn't a flaw in her capacity to write well. Did I hear you correctly?
Oh, I think it's a flaw in her. I think it was self-indulgent, and somebody should have told her don't do it.
Okay.
I had the same thought. Like, what editor did not say, like, hey, maybe you should make this less confusing?
Okay. All right. Well, we should probably wrap it up here. Time got away from me, and it's a fascinating book. But what's your take, Richard? Would you recommend, despite the flaws, that someone read this book?
Yes. I recommend it with the caveat that if it's not your cup of tea, it will very much not be your cup of tea. And definitely, don't judge it on the first 20 pages or whatever that is. But I thought she did. Once she got going, I liked the prose. I had no problems with the present tense. And she did just great job of capturing the feel of Victorian prose, but kind of modernized, complete with all the bric-a-brac of everything. And I mean, because the Victorians were into bric-a-brac, and the story is
and what a collection of weird characters she was capable of creating for us and making real. Sarina, would you recommend this book?
Oh, definitely. If a reader likes Victorian fantasy, mystery, like those elements, I think this is a great book. And even though there are things I strongly didn't like about the book, the things that I did like outweighed the prose outweighed the con. It was for me, so intriguing and engaging. And I was hooked, like, after the beginning. As soon as there was a ghost on the page, I was so immersed and hooked. I loved it.
All right, great. Well, that's, audience, our recommendation. That's 3 for 3, recommending Things in Jars by the author Jess Kidd, a young lady with, I hope, many more books in her. And we're going to close with my thanks to my guests, Richard Lovett and Sarina. Thank you for coming by. And we publish only once every 2 months, so consider signing up as a steady subscriber. We don't sell ads or anything like that, or sell your names. And so again, Richard, Sarina, Dorie, with her new book out, and Richard with your new book. And tell us once again the titles of your book that are just out. Go ahead, Richard. Again, your book.
Neptune's Treasure, The Adventures of Floyd and Brittany.
All right. And Sarina?
To Ghoul for School is the first book in the Vega Bloodmire Wicked Witch mystery series.
All right. Don't get lost in that labyrinth, or do get lost in that labyrinth and enjoy yourself. This is Caroline Miller for Just Read It. My 2 guests, we had a good time with you, and please come back next time. Bye.